Human leaned close to steady an alien girl's breathing. Her cultural explanation softened him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The wind howled fiercely through the frozen plains, carrying with it the icy sting of snow. Commander Jason would pull his collar tighter, wishing he had a moment to catch his breath, but the mission demanded his attention. His ship had landed in the most desolate of landscapes, an icy wasteland far beyond the reach of civilization. And yet, there was something, or someone, here, in desperate need of assistance. As Jason made his way across the vast, snow-covered expanse, he saw her. AIA. The alien girl was struggling to breathe, her body trembling as she fought against the cold. Her violet skin shimmered faintly against the stark white snow, and her silvery hair whipped in the wind. Despite her clear discomfort, there was a certain grace to her movements. Her large eyes met his, full of confusion and a hint of fear, though not for the reasons Jason might have expected. As he approached her, he noticed that her breathing was shallow, labored. She was holding her chest, trying to calm herself, but the harsh environment made it nearly impossible. Are you okay? Jason asked, his voice rough from the cold. AIA looked up at him, the confusion in her eyes deepening. She didn't seem to understand what he had said, her alien physiology too different from his own for her to comprehend his language immediately. Jason knelt down beside her, instinctively reaching out to steady her trembling body. He had no idea what she was going through, but he couldn't stand to see her suffer. As he gently placed a hand on her shoulder, he realized that he needed to do something. This wasn't just a case of needing warmth. Something more was happening here. Hey, it's okay, Jason murmured, trying to comfort her. Just breathe with me, all right? He didn't know if she understood, but he hoped that his calm tone might ease her anxiety. AIA's eyes shifted from confusion to curiosity as she studied him. It was clear that her culture didn't involve such close physical contact, but there was something about Jason's sincerity that seemed to soften her stance. Slowly, she nodded, though her face still held a trace of unease. Jason breathed slowly, deliberately, trying to show her how to inhale and exhale in a steady rhythm. AIA mimicked him, her breathing becoming more controlled, though it took time. After a few moments, her expression softened, her discomfort easing. Jason smiled gently, feeling a sense of relief wash over him as he watched her begin to recover. She looked up at him, her violet eyes now filled with something different, something akin to understanding. Finally, she spoke, her voice surprisingly melodic, yet heavy with her accent. Your culture, it is different, she said slowly, as if piecing together the words. Jason raised an eyebrow, not entirely sure what she meant. Different how? He asked, though he was already starting to understand. You touch when we breathe. AIA paused, seemingly trying to process the meaning behind her own words. Jason nodded, realizing the gravity of her statement. In her culture, such closeness might have been a sign of intimacy or an invasion of personal space. But here, on this frozen world, it was simply an act of kindness. Her explanation softened him further. She wasn't just another alien species. She was someone trying to make sense of a world so far removed from her own, just as he was trying to understand hers. I'm sorry, Jason said quietly. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I just wanted to help. AIA's gaze softened. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, her expression still wary but somehow more open. She had her own culture, her own set of rules and expectations, but there was something human about her too. The desire to survive, to understand, to connect. In that moment, Jason felt a bond form, an understanding between two beings from vastly different worlds. It wasn't something that could be explained easily, but it was there. He smiled again, the tension between them easing. Let's get you somewhere warm, all right. Ai's breath finally slowed, the frantic rise and fall of her chest beginning to settle into a more regular pattern. Jason watched her closely, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Her body, once stiff with tension, now seemed to relax in his presence, even if just a little. There was still a certain wariness in her eyes, a guardedness that spoke of a deep-rooted cultural difference. She wasn't used to being touched, not even in moments of distress. Yet here she was, allowing him to help her without protest. It was clear that this act of kindness was as foreign to her as it was necessary. Jason rose to his feet slowly, his movements careful not to disturb her newly found calm. He glanced around, assessing their surroundings. The snow continued to fall relentlessly, the bitter wind biting at his exposed skin. His ship was a few miles away, but he wasn't sure AIA was strong enough to make the journey just yet. "We need to get out of here," Jason said, more to himself than to her. AIA, still seated on the ground, looked up at him, her violet eyes searching his face for understanding. She didn't speak at first, her gaze flickering as if weighing the situation. "You want to help me?" she said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Jason nodded, offering her a small smile. "Of course. You're not alone out here. I can't just leave you like this." AI seemed to study him for a moment, as if trying to make sense of his words, of the way he spoke. His tone was calm, and his expression, though firm, held a kind of softness that made her feel oddly safe. "I don't understand," she confessed, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why?" Jason hesitated, taking a deep breath. The truth was, he didn't fully understand it either. He had acted without thinking, driven by an instinctual need to help her. But he knew one thing. It wasn't just because of the mission. It was because, despite their differences, he couldn't leave a fellow being out in the cold to suffer. "Because it's the right thing to do," Jason finally replied. The words felt simple, yet they held a depth that went beyond logic. He extended his hand to her, his fingers curling slightly in invitation. AIA looked at his hand, then back at his face, and for a brief moment, Jason thought she might refuse him. But then, with a soft sigh, she reached out and placed her hand in his. Her skin was cool to the touch, but it wasn't the freezing chill he had expected. "Thank you," she said, the words quiet but sincere. It was a small gesture, a simple acknowledgement of his help, but to Jason, it meant more than he could explain. Together, they stood. Jason pulled her up gently, guiding her to her feet. AIA wavered slightly, her legs unsteady from the cold and her earlier distress. Jason steadied her, his grip firm yet gentle. He could feel her body trembling slightly, though it wasn't just from the cold now. There was something more to it, something emotional, perhaps, or a lingering sense of vulnerability. "We're going to make it," Jason said softly, offering her reassurance. She didn't reply immediately, but her eyes softened ever so slightly. AIA had never experienced this kind of kindness, this kind of understanding from a human before. Her people were different. They didn't offer help to strangers, especially not ones from distant worlds. Yet here was Jason, a human, doing just that. In his actions, she saw something that was hard for her to grasp. It wasn't just a matter of survival. It was something deeper, a sense of empathy that transcended worlds. She looked down at their intertwined hands for a moment before looking up at him again, her gaze softer now. "I don't know what to think of you," she murmured. Jason chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You don't have to think of me at all. Just know that I'll get you to safety. That's all that matters right now." They began walking, the snow crunching beneath their boots, but the wind didn't feel quite as biting anymore. There was something warmer now, something more human, more understanding between them. And as they moved forward, Jason couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something he hadn't expected, a bond, fragile but genuine, forming in the most unlikely of places. Ai's breath finally slowed, the frantic rise and fall of her chest beginning to settle into a more regular pattern. Jason watched her closely, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Her body, once stiff with tension, now seemed to relax in his presence, even if just a little. There was still a certain wariness in her eyes, a guardedness that spoke of a deep-rooted cultural difference. She wasn't used to being touched, not even in moments of distress. Yet here she was, allowing him to help her without protest. It was clear that this act of kindness was as foreign to her as it was necessary. Jason rose to his feet slowly, his movements careful not to disturb her newly found calm. He glanced around, assessing their surroundings. The snow continued to fall relentlessly, the bitter wind biting at his exposed skin. His ship was a few miles away, but he wasn't sure AIA was strong enough to make the journey just yet. "We need to get out of here," Jason said, more to himself than to her. AIA, still seated on the ground, looked up at him, her violet eyes searching his face for understanding. She didn't speak at first, her gaze flickering as if weighing the situation. "You want to help me?" she said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Jason nodded, offering her a small smile. "Of course. You're not alone out here. I can't just leave you like this." AI seemed to study him for a moment, as if trying to make sense of his words, of the way he spoke. His tone was calm, and his expression, though firm, held a kind of softness that made her feel oddly safe. "I don't understand," she confessed, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why?" Jason hesitated, taking a deep breath. The truth was, he didn't fully understand it either. He had acted without thinking, driven by an instinctual need to help her. But he knew one thing. It wasn't just because of the mission. It was because, despite their differences, he couldn't leave a fellow being out in the cold to suffer. "Because it's the right thing to do," Jason finally replied. The words felt simple, yet they held a depth that went beyond logic. He extended his hand to her, his fingers curling slightly in invitation. AIA looked at his hand, then back at his face, and for a brief moment, Jason thought she might refuse him. But then, with a soft sigh, she reached out and placed her hand in his. Her skin was cool to the touch, but it wasn't the freezing chill he had expected. "Thank you," she said, the words quiet but sincere. It was a small gesture, a simple acknowledgement of his help, but to Jason, it meant more than he could explain. Together, they stood. Jason pulled her up, gently, guiding her to her feet. AIA wavered slightly, her legs unsteady from the cold and her earlier distress. Jason steadied her, his grip firm yet gentle. He could feel her body trembling slightly, though it wasn't just from the cold now. There was something more to it, something emotional, perhaps, or a lingering sense of vulnerability. "We're going to make it," Jason said softly, offering her reassurance. She didn't reply immediately, but her eyes softened ever so slightly. AIA had never experienced this kind of kindness, this kind of understanding from a human before. Her people were different. They didn't offer help to strangers, especially not ones from distant worlds. Yet here was Jason, a human, doing just that. In his actions, she saw something that was hard for her to grasp. It wasn't just a matter of survival. It was something deeper, a sense of empathy that transcended worlds. She looked down at their intertwined hands for a moment before looking up at him again, her gaze softer now. "I don't know what to think of you," she murmured. Jason chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You don't have to think of me at all. Just know that I'll get you to safety. That's all that matters right now." They began walking, the snow crunching beneath their boots, but the wind didn't feel quite as biting anymore. There was something warmer now, something more human, more understanding between them. And as they moved forward, Jason couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something he hadn't expected. A bond, fragile but genuine, forming in the most unlikely of places. The cold wind whipped around them, but it wasn't as harsh as it had been earlier. Jason had managed to lead AIA to a small shelter that he'd spotted in the distance, a cave of sorts that seemed to have been carved into the mountainside by natural forces. It was a far cry from comfortable, but it would offer some protection from the storm. The entrance was narrow, but Jason was able to crawl through with relative ease. He glanced over his shoulder, making sure A was following closely behind. She seemed hesitant, but eventually, she slipped inside, the warmth of the cave offering some reprieve from the bitter chill. Jason looked around. It wasn't much, just a space with jagged rock walls and the faint glow of bioluminescent moss along the ceiling. But it was enough. He set down his bag and began rummaging through it. "This will have to do for now," he said, trying to reassure her. AIA said nothing, but her expression softened, a faint look of relief crossing her face as she sank to the ground. Jason set up a small makeshift shelter inside the cave, spreading out a thermal blanket he'd kept in his pack. He then moved to a small fire starter kit, setting up a flame and watching it catch. AIA watched him from across the room, her violet eyes curious but cautious. She had been silent ever since they entered the cave, her gaze drifting between Jason and the unfamiliar surroundings. Jason gave her a small smile, trying to lighten the mood. "I don't know how long we'll be stuck here," he said, sitting down near the fire. But I promise, I'll make sure you're safe. AIA hesitated before responding. Why? Her voice was quiet, but there was an edge of confusion in her tone. Jason looked at her, the flickering fire casting shadows on his face. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe because I couldn't just leave you out there in the cold. Maybe because I know what it feels like to be lost, to feel alone. AIA was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the fire. Jason watched her, sensing the weight of her thoughts. It wasn't just the cold that had brought them together. There was something deeper at play here, a connection that neither of them fully understood yet. He sighed, leaning back against the wall of the cave. You're not like anyone I've ever met before, Jason said quietly. I've seen a lot in my time, but your people, are different. I'm not sure what that means yet, but I'm willing to learn. AIA looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. You want to learn about us? She asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Jason nodded. Yeah, I do. We're not so different, you and I. We're both just trying to survive in this world, right? AIA stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. Maybe, she said, her voice softer now. Maybe we're more alike than you think. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but rather filled with an unspoken understanding. Jason could feel the tension between them slowly dissipating, replaced by something else, something that, though undefined, felt real. He glanced at AIA again, noticing how her features softened in the dim light of the fire. Her eyes, once filled with confusion and wariness, now held a glimmer of something more, perhaps curiosity, or even the beginnings of trust. He couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold for the two of them. They were from different worlds, with vastly different cultures and beliefs. Yet, in this moment, it felt as though they were no longer so different after all. Jason shifted, his body sore from the cold and the long journey, but he didn't mind. For the first time in a while, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The storm outside raged on, but in the warmth of the cave, Jason and AI sat in silence, both of them unsure of what the future held, but knowing that they would face it together. And for the first time in a long while, that didn't seem like such a bad thing. The hours passed slowly, the wind howling outside the cave, but Jason and AI stayed near the fire, the warmth of the small flame providing a sense of comfort in the otherwise cold and desolate landscape. Jason watched as AIA studied the flickering light, her violet eyes reflecting the dancing flames. He could tell that she was deep in thought, her mind racing with questions and doubts. He knew she must have been wondering about the same things he was. What brought them together in this vast, unforgiving world, and what would happen next? Jason shifted slightly, the weight of his body settling into the rough stone floor. He had spent countless hours in situations like this, stranded on foreign planets, trying to figure out his next move. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't alone. AIA's presence made the stillness more bearable, and for some reason, he felt a connection with her that he couldn't explain. A connection that went beyond mere survival. Tell me about your world, Jason said, his voice quiet but sincere. AIA glanced up at him, her expression still uncertain but open. She seemed to consider his request for a moment before speaking. My world is called Azura, she began, her voice soft, almost wistful. It is a place of beauty and danger, a world of endless oceans and vast forests. Our people have lived there for centuries, thriving in harmony with the land and sea. But we are not without our struggles. My people value strength, loyalty, and respect for the natural order. She paused, her gaze drifting toward the entrance of the cave, where the wind howled in the distance. And yet, we are not without our flaws. We are a proud species, sometimes too proud for our own good. Jason nodded, taking in her words. He could hear the pain in her voice, the weight of a history that had shaped her world. He could sense that she was conflicted, torn between her loyalty to her people and the strange sense of camaraderie that was slowly growing between them. What about you? AIA asked, her voice breaking through his thoughts. Where do you come from? Jason smiled softly, shifting his position to face her more directly. I'm from Earth, he said, a place not too different from Azura, in some ways. It's a world of contrasts, beautiful, but sometimes harsh. We've had our share of struggles too, but we've always found a way to survive. He paused, considering how much to share. There was a lot he could say about Earth, about his life as a soldier, the battles he had fought, the losses he had endured. But something told him that AI didn't need to hear all of that. Not yet, anyway. I've seen a lot in my time, he said finally, but nothing like this. Nothing like what we're facing now. AIA's eyes met his, her gaze steady and searching. She seemed to understand, the unspoken words passing between them. For the first time, Jason didn't feel like a stranger to her. She wasn't just an alien, not just someone from a distant world. She was someone who had been through her own battles, her own struggles, and now, they were in this together. "We'll make it," Jason said, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. It wasn't just a promise, it was a conviction. AIA nodded, her expression softening. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "We will." They sat there for a while longer, the fire crackling between them, as the storm outside raged on. There was something peaceful in the quiet, something that made Jason believe, even if only for a moment, that they could survive this, that they could overcome the odds. In that small cave, with AIA by his side, the world didn't seem quite so vast and uncaring. It seemed, for once, like a place where two beings, two completely different beings, could find common ground, even in the harshest of conditions. And for Jason, that was enough. The cave had grown quieter as the night deepened, the storm outside still fierce, but the warmth from the small fire made the space feel more bearable. Jason glanced over at AIA, who was sitting near the edge of the fire, her back to the wall. She was looking at something in her hands, a small trinket, something she had pulled from her belongings earlier. Jason wasn't sure what it was, but he could see the quiet concentration on her face as she examined it. After a moment, he broke the silence. "What is that?" AIA didn't look up immediately, her fingers tracing the edges of the object. "It's a token," she said softly. "From my family." Jason leaned in slightly, his curiosity piqued. "Your family?" AIA nodded, finally looking up at him, her expression distant but not cold. "Yes. It was given to me by my mother. It represents our bond, our connection to each other and to our home." Her words held a weight, something deeper than just the object itself. Jason studied her, noting the faint sadness in her eyes, the subtle tremor in her voice. "It must be important to you," he said gently. AIA nodded again, her gaze dropping to the token in her hands. "It is. It's all I have left of them." There was a long pause as the fire crackled between them. Jason could feel the tension in the air, the quiet weight of her emotions. He wanted to say something comforting, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, he simply sat with her in the silence, offering his presence without trying to fix anything. AIA took a deep breath, her fingers still resting on the token. "I didn't choose this life," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't choose to leave Azura, to be alone in this strange world. But it is my reality now, and I have to accept it." Jason's heart ached at her words, and he found himself wanting to reach out, to offer some kind of solace. But he knew that this was something she needed to work through. Herself. "You don't have to do it alone," he said quietly. AIA's eyes flickered up at him, meeting his gaze. "I know," she said softly, "but it's hard to trust. Hard to let someone in after everything." Jason understood that. He'd seen it in his own life. The walls that people built to protect themselves, the fear of letting others get too close. "I get it," he said. "But sometimes, letting someone in is the only way to truly heal." AIA was silent for a moment, her gaze drifting back to the token in her hands. "Maybe," she said finally, almost to herself. "Maybe I'm starting to believe that." Jason smiled, his expression warm. "You're not alone in this, AIA. Not anymore." AIA looked up at him, and for the first time since they had met, Jason saw something shift in her eyes, a glimmer of hope, however small. She didn't say anything, but the soft nod she gave him spoke volumes. The storm outside had not abated, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They were both here, in this small cave, facing their fears together, and that made all the difference. Jason leaned back against the wall, feeling the weight of the day settle over him. The journey ahead would be difficult, that much was certain. But for the first time, he felt like they might just make it. Together. AIA shifted closer to the fire, the glow illuminating her features in a soft, amber light. Jason watched her for a moment, then closed his eyes, allowing the warmth to seep into his bones. The future was uncertain, but with each passing minute, the bond between them felt a little stronger, a little more real. And for now, that was enough. The following morning, the storm had finally begun to subside, leaving behind a crisp, silent landscape. The cold still hung in the air, but there was a sense of calm that hadn't been there the night before. Jason stood at the entrance of the cave, peering out into the vast expanse of snow-covered mountains, his breath forming clouds in the chilly morning air. He had been up for a while, checking their supplies and assessing their next move. The storm had left them stranded, but now, with the wind dying down, it was time to get moving again. He turned back to the fire, which was slowly dying down. AIA was still asleep, curled up on the thermal blanket he had set up for her the night before. Her breathing was steady, but there was an underlying tension in her posture, even in her sleep. Jason knew that whatever they were facing next, she would need all the strength she could muster. As he moved quietly to prepare some food, he glanced over at her again. The events of the past few days had been a whirlwind. What had started as a simple mission had turned into something far more complex. There were still so many unknowns about AIA, about her world, and about what the future held for both of them. But for now, there was one thing Jason was certain of. He couldn't leave her behind. He wouldn't. Jason had been through countless battles, missions, and moments of uncertainty, but none of them had ever felt like this. The bond that was forming between him and AIA was unexpected, yet undeniable. It was as though they were drawn together by something larger than just survival. He didn't know what it was, but it felt like the only thing that mattered right now. The sound of AIA stirring brought him out of his thoughts. He turned to see her sitting up, her eyes blinking in the soft light of the morning. She looked around for a moment, as if disoriented, before locking eyes with him. "Morning," Jason said softly, offering a small smile. AIA nodded, though her expression was still distant. "Morning," she replied, her voice still hoarse from the cold. She paused, then asked, "What's the plan?" Jason took a deep breath, his smile fading slightly. "We need to get moving. The storm's passed, but we're still a long way from safety. We'll head for the nearest settlement. It's not far, but it's the best option we've got." AIA looked at him for a moment, then nodded. She didn't question his decision, but Jason could tell she wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of traveling so soon. She had only just recovered from the shock of the cold, and the idea of trekking across the harsh landscape again must have seemed daunting. But there was no other choice. They couldn't afford to stay in the cave for much longer. Jason stood up, brushing the snow off his clothes. "We'll take it slow. No rush. Just stay close." AIA stood as well, though her movements were still a little stiff. She walked over to where Jason had been preparing some food, her gaze flickering to the meager rations he had set aside. "Is this all we have left?" she asked, her voice wary. Jason nodded. "It's enough for today. We'll figure something out once we get moving." AIA didn't say anything, but Jason could see the discomfort in her eyes. She wasn't used to living like this, surviving off whatever scraps they could find. It wasn't the life she had known, and it wasn't the life she was used to. He could sense the weight of it, the uncertainty that came with every step they took. But it was all they had. Jason handed her a portion of the food, and they ate in silence for a few moments. The food was bland, but it was warm, and that was enough for now. When they finished, Jason stood up again, gathering their things. "Ready?" he asked, his voice softer now. AIA nodded, though there was still a hesitation in her movements. She wasn't entirely ready, but she was determined. Jason could see that, and for the first time, he realized that she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting. Fighting to adapt to this new world, fighting to survive, and fighting to trust him. "Let's go," he said quietly. Together, they stepped out into the cold morning, the landscape stretching out before them. It was vast and empty, but it wasn't as isolating as it had been the day before. With each step they took, Jason felt a little more certain. The journey ahead would be hard, and the path uncertain, but he wasn't alone anymore. Neither of them was. They had each other, and that was enough to keep going. The landscape stretched out before them, a vast expanse of white snow and jagged rocks. The cold was still biting, but it didn't seem as harsh now, not with AIA walking beside him. Jason glanced at her, noting how she moved with more purpose today. The stiffness in her steps had eased, though he could still sense the lingering tension in her. They had been walking for hours now, the only sound the crunch of their boots in the snow and the occasional gust of wind. Jason kept his pace steady, making sure to keep an eye on AIA. He knew she wasn't fully recovered yet, and he didn't want to push her too hard. "We're getting closer," Jason said, his voice breaking the silence. AIA looked up at him, her violet eyes reflecting the same determination she had shown the day before. "How do you know?" she asked, her voice tinged with a hint of skepticism. Jason smiled. "I've been here before, or at least near this area. There's a settlement just over the next ridge." AIA nodded, her face unreadable. Jason wasn't sure if she believed him entirely, but she didn't question it. They kept moving, the silence between them comfortable now, not awkward as it had been before. As they reached the top of the ridge, Jason stopped and motioned for AIA to do the same. From the crest, they could see the settlement below, a small cluster of buildings nestled against a rocky outcrop. It was far smaller than the cities Jason was used to, but it was enough to offer safety, warmth, and supplies. AIA's gaze softened as she looked at the settlement, her expression distant. "Is it like your home?" she asked, her voice quiet. Jason paused, considering her question. "In some ways," he said slowly. "But in others, not really. My home is different." AIA turned her eyes toward him, her gaze curious. "How so?" Jason hesitated, unsure of how much to say. He had never been particularly good at explaining his past, especially to someone who came from such a different world. "I guess," he said, choosing his words carefully, "it's more crowded, more chaotic. A lot of people, a lot of noise. We've got big cities, technology, all sorts of things. But sometimes it feels empty. Like no matter how many people are around, you can still feel alone." AIA was silent for a long moment, her eyes still fixed on the settlement below. "I understand," she said softly. Jason glanced at her, surprised by the quiet empathy in her voice. "You do?" he asked. AIA nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I felt that way too. We have many people on Azura, but sometimes I feel disconnected. Like I don't belong, even though I'm surrounded by my own kind." Jason looked at her, sensing the weight of her words. He didn't say anything at first, letting the silence hang between them. There was something about the way she spoke, the vulnerability she allowed herself to show, that made Jason feel like they were more alike than he had realized. "We're not so different, you and I," Jason said quietly, finally breaking the silence. AIA looked at him then, her gaze softening. "No," she agreed. "We're not." Together, they started down the ridge, making their way toward the settlement. As they walked, Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve. The journey wasn't over, but it was a step toward something better. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since he had met AIA, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. They would face the challenges ahead together, and that was enough. AIA walked beside him, her pace steady, her confidence growing with each step. She wasn't the same person who had stumbled through the storm with him days ago. She had changed, and so had he. Maybe it wasn't just the journey that had shaped them, it was each other. And for the first time, Jason didn't feel so alone in the vastness of the world. Together, they were stronger. Together, they would make it through. As Jason and AIA approached the settlement, the quiet hum of life on the outskirts became more apparent. The settlement was small but functional, nestled against a rocky outcrop with buildings that looked like they had been carefully constructed to withstand the harsh weather of the planet. Jason had been here before, but it had never looked quite so welcoming. Maybe it was the calm after the storm, or maybe it was because he wasn't alone this time. As they walked through the narrow path that led to the entrance, AIA walked beside him, her posture straighter than it had been in days. The tension in her steps had eased, and though she still looked around with cautious eyes, there was a quiet confidence in the way she moved now. "Not bad," AIA said quietly, eyeing the settlement as they approached. "It's not much," Jason replied, "but it'll do for now. We can rest here, gather some supplies, and figure out what's next." AIA nodded, but her gaze lingered on the people she could see working around the settlement. They looked ordinary, in a way that made her feel both alien and oddly connected at the same time. Jason led her toward a small building that looked like a shop of sorts. "This place should have what we need," he said. The door opened with a soft chime, and a woman behind the counter looked up, her face lighting up in recognition. Hey, Jason. Long time no see, she greeted him. Jason gave her a small smile. Yeah, it's been a while. We need some supplies. Food, fuel, anything you've got. The woman nodded, her eyes flicking to AIA, who was standing quietly at Jason's side. Of course, she said. We've got plenty. And I see you brought company this time. She eyed AIA curiously, but with a friendly expression. AIA shifted slightly, uncomfortable under the woman's gaze, but she didn't say anything. Jason gave a small wave of his hand, as if to brush away any awkwardness. She's with me, he said, his tone firm but not unfriendly. Just need some supplies to get moving. The woman gave a nod, though there was a slight hesitation in her eyes. Right. Let me grab what you need. As she turned to gather the supplies, Jason looked over at AIA, who was still standing near the door, her eyes scanning the room as if she were trying to read the people around her. Are you okay? Jason asked softly, stepping closer to her. AIA glanced at him, then nodded. I'm fine. Just not used to all of this. Her voice was low, but Jason could hear the uncertainty in it. He understood. AIA had come from a world where people didn't interact with strangers the way humans did, where kindness was rare and trust even rarer. But here, in this small settlement, there was a sense of community that she wasn't used to. Jason gave her a reassuring smile. You'll get used to it, he said. I know it's a lot, but it's a good place. These people are just trying to get by, same as us. AIA didn't respond, but she did glance around the room again, her gaze a little softer this time. When the woman returned with the supplies, Jason paid for them, and they made their way back outside. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the settlement. The warmth of the day had begun to fade, and the coolness of the night crept in. Where do we go from here? AIA asked, her voice steady but quiet as they walked toward the edge of the settlement. Jason looked at her, then out toward the horizon. We'll head north. There's a place I know, a safe spot we can stay while we figure things out. It's not too far, but we need to move quickly before the weather turns again. AIA nodded, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. And what about everything else? She asked, her voice almost uncertain. Jason stopped walking, turning to face her. What do you mean? AIA looked down for a moment, then back up at him, her eyes serious. This bond between us. It's not just survival anymore, is it? Jason stared at her, caught off guard by the question. But then he realized what she meant. The connection they had shared over the past few days, the trust that had slowly been built between them. It had started as something simple, something necessary. But now, it felt like something deeper. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, but it was there, undeniable. No, he said slowly. It's not just survival. AIA looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she nodded slowly. Then let's make sure we both get out of this alive, she said quietly, her voice steady once more. Jason smiled, feeling a sense of determination rise within him. I'll make sure of that, he said. And together, they continued walking into the night, ready to face whatever came next, as long as they had each other.